Former Constitutional Court Justice Albie Sachs has urged political parties to respect the right to vote. Sachs was speaking earlier this week during the signing of the Electoral Code of Conduct pledge by various parties. He joins us via a video link to reflect on 30 years of our constitutional democracy. Albie, very good afternoon. Always great to speak to you. Congratulations and happy Freedom Day.
And happy Freedom to you and all the viewers.
Now, I'd like to start off with the look at the historical context and specific processes that took place in Lusaka to craft South Africa's constitution. Just walk us through that process. I know you were heavily involved.
Yes, you know, it goes back to 1986, when at the very time when Oliver Tambo was sending messages to South Africa to make South Africa ungovernable and apartheid unworkable. He was preparing for negotiations. He was so worried that when the moment came to actually talk about a new South Africa, we in the liberation movement wouldn't be ready. So he set up a very semi-secret constitution committee, first headed by Professor Jack Simons, and then Zola Squia took over. Penwell Maduna came on, Ted Pekani, Job Jobatwana, from abroad was Tara Aspal and myself, and then Bridget Mabandla joined us. And our instructions really were to use the Freedom Charter as a basis, and a concept that had been developed by gosh, the name's slipping in my mind at the moment, Palo Jordan, how can I forget Palo's name, which really became the foundation of our new constitutional order. At that stage, everybody all over the world was sending in constitutions that all had the same objective: get majority, one person, one vote, but make sure that the whites were comfortable with any change that there might be. There would, in effect, be a white minority veto. And our mandate really was to make a constitution that would protect everybody in South Africa from abuse, not because they were white or minority or black or brown or colored or Indian, but because they were human beings. And we spent that year, the next year, the year after, and by 1988, after many, many drafts, we had a big seminar with over 150 people attending from the underground, from Ponte-Sizwe, diplomatic missions and others, overwhelmingly black people, drafting and agreeing to basic guidelines for a new constitutional order. And that was really, under Oliver Tambo's stewardship, the foundation of what became our constitution eventually. Long before the Berlin Wall fell, it had nothing to do with Gorbachev. It had nothing to do with some secret meeting that's supposed to have taken place between Nelson Mandela and capitalists in a drawing room in some corporate office. It was hard, grinding work, discussion, debate, living in Africa. And our guidelines were picked up by the Organization of African Unity, became the Harare Declaration. The Harare Declaration was sent to the non-aligned movement, to the Commonwealth. Even Margaret Thatcher had to agree to it, and finally went to the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1989. It was accepted by acclamation. And that was how our constitution basically was birthed. And the idea was only a democratically elected body in South Africa would have the legitimacy and authority to draft the constitution, but those constitutional guidelines then became the foundation stones of what was drafted in Cape Town in our democratically elected body, elected in April 1994. So the biggest gift of those elections, if you like, was to create the parliament that drafted our final constitution, the voice of the people, laying down the conditions of never again would there be abuse, violation of the rights of people. The people would have a right to speak, and people would also have rights, basic rights to health, to education, all the different things we want. It was a magnificent year. What worries me a little bit is people forgetting how violent it was in those days. Our people were dying. More people died between 1990 and 1994 from political violence than in all the years from 1910 to 1990. And bombs were going off. Election workers were being massacred. There was violence on what was then called the East Rand, between the ANC youth and the ZAPU youth, violence between IFP and ANC. And I remember the whites buying up canned goods. Oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen when Mandela becomes president? And then afterwards, 5 years later, oh, what's going to happen when Mandela goes? They bought up canned goods again. So it wasn't as though this was a halcyon period where we all came together nicely and neatly. It was a magnificent day, a wonderful day. We queued for hours and hours and hours. And it was equivalent to the day in other countries of independence when a flag went down, the old flag, new flag went up, the band played, everybody cheered because we had a new country. In South Africa, 20 million people took part. It wasn't just the elite with lovely music and radio and press covering it. So for me, it's a very emotional moment to remember that time, the huge breakthrough that it was. We got a country. We don't have the society we need, but we've got a country. And I think of this, and I'm just jumping ahead without your questions, when we see what's happening in Palestine, Israel today, it seemed impossible in South Africa. And our way through was through those elections. We got a country. So for all the problems, and they're huge, and we made lots of mistakes, and there have been crimes along the way, and lots of unacceptable things have been happening. We've got a country, and we've got rights, and we've got the mechanisms for responding through voting, through the courts, through law enforcement, through realizing social and economic rights. They're there in the Constitution. Now we must use the Constitution to make those rights real in the lives of the people.
Albie, I want to take you back to that era, because you talked about comfort for the whites, and that the Constitution had to be comfortable for everybody. Now, one would imagine that if whites had been largely responsible for apartheid days before, if you will, then there was bound to be some discomfort, that it had to be uncomfortable to work for the majority of the black people. How did you transition, or how was this process transitioned?
It took a lot of intelligence and skill and people's skills as well, if you like. The whites, I'm speaking in very blunt terms now, the whites had the guns. They had the power controlling the administration. They controlled the economy. How were we to persuade them in the liberation movement side to lay down their guns, to give up that total power they had over the army, the police force, over the civil service for majority rule? And the key answer to that was a Bill of Rights, protecting the rights of everybody because they're human beings. And it wasn't a concession on our part. We didn't want a government that would now be able to just seize your home and take away your motor car, throw you into jail, discriminate against you on the grounds of your gender, or on the grounds of your race, or on the grounds of your ethnic group. We didn't want that. We wanted a free, open, democratic society. We fought hard for that. We'd seen many countries where people had fought heroically in Africa and elsewhere for freedom, where the new leadership had gone on to abuse their powers. We wanted now a country with strong rights, a strong judiciary, a free press, the right to complain, the right to bring about changes of government. These were not concessions to the whites. These were creating a kind of society we'd always believed in. And we did it through a two-stage process of constitution making. The first was to get elections on a fairly conservative interim constitution, to get a parliament that would then draft the new law, basic law for the country. We agreed on certain key fundamental principles, the separation of powers, which we wanted, a Bill of Rights, which we wanted, some degree of devolution for provincial and local government, which we wanted. These were not concessions to anybody. This was the country that we really wanted. And confidence was built up through the process of seeing elections working, that we were able to manage elections, and seeing debates being held in Parliament, and French and Waller saying, order, order, order. It was a new kind of struggle, if you like, but a struggle in the framework of agreed basic principles for the country. There was a government of national unity at that stage for an interim period. The National Party stayed in for 2 years only, while the new constitution was being drafted. Then they stepped out. The IFP continued in the Government of National Unity. There were lots of interim arrangements to as it were, cushion the process of changing, and for all people in South Africa and the world to get used to seeing that the top leadership of South Africa, internationally, speaking to the world, receiving diplomats and so on, were black people, men and women, sons and daughters of our soil, running the country. There wasn't chaos. The society continued working, and that was so important for building the confidence and then integrating the armies, which to me was the almost biggest miracle of them all. And I emphasize these points because sometimes today the situation in Palestine, Israel, looks intractable and impossible. South Africa looked more intractable, more impossible. But it was intelligence, thoughtfulness, and getting everybody into the negotiations. Don't try and kill the extremists on the other side. Try and get them, as you see them, try and get them to negotiations so that everybody can agree on the way forward for the country.
Now, very, very quickly, Albie, we have just a minute for this response. You've indicated that there were many things that didn't quite work out as planned. If we look, for instance, at the levels of inequality in South Africa, it is said that South Africa has the greatest inequality between the haves and the have-nots in the world. Is it something that should have been addressed by the Constitution? Was it addressed? Is it a case of failure to implement?
Sure, there's nothing in the Constitution that says thou shalt have inequality. On the contrary, the Constitution requires change and transformation. Social and economic rights are in the Constitution, and the Constitution was achieved through struggle with millions of people involved, and the Constitution will become realized through struggle, but not with guns this time. We don't need tanks in the streets. We don't need, through force and violence to break through. Now we've got rights under the Constitution to get the promise, if you like, that's in that document. We've got a country. We don't have the society we want, but we do have the country that we fought so hard for. We've got to use the country to get that society.